Devotion. He's on your right. So we've got mid-range Esper, which leads me to believe maybe Esper humans here.
Yeah, with Fair again, this is our actual third feature match of this weekend where we've seen the new Blue-White God in action. We've seen it in a Esper human shell. Oh, sorry, we saw it in just an Esper shell with alongside Obsidat and Elspeth. We saw it last round as in the White Weenie Splash Blue deck, and now we see it sort of in a Esper human shell.
Oh, okay. We have, I figured out what happened. Kent had a deck list error. So they are taking care of that. This is actually our backup match. So we're going to start here because the judges are sorting things out with Kent. So no big deal. We'll find out what happens there as we do have that information. We'll pass it along. But we'll start here with Hipp and Koloff. We've got Mono Black Devotion against Esper Midrange. There's a Godless Shrine here from Hipp. You do see a Mutavault coming across for 2. Swamp is the second land there for Koloff. So Hipp will take the first damage of round number 8 here.
Fairly innocent start for Daniel thus far.
Yeah, no discard, no Pack Rat. Doesn't leave up a removal spell. Nothing crazy going on there from the Mono Black Devotion side. You see a Hallowed Fountain passing the turn back. And for you guys wondering at home, is this pretty stock Mono Black Devotion since we've seen some different lists? It is. 4 Desecration Demon, 4 Grey Merchant, 4 Pack Rat, 4 Nightveil Spectre, Connections, Bioblight, Thoughtseize, Hero's Downfall, 2 Devour Flesh, 1 Whip of Erebos. That card hasn't seen as much play recently. And then just 25 lands, 4 of which are temples. So nothing crazy going on here as we do see a Bramaz, King of Resco show up.
Also back-to-back rounds featuring this in the main deck of at least one of our decks.
Yeah, I want to see more of this card. I want to see this card in action. I want to see it win a game. See, Koloff looks like he has Devour Flesh in his hand right now, so I might just want to take care of that immediately, and that's exactly what he's going to do. Use Underworld Connections land to do that. Looks like maybe he wants to fire up the old Mutavault too.
Still just going beatdowns.
Yeah. Every point counts.
A little curious on the heels of Ryan getting all that life through the Devour Flesh.
Well, makes sense, actually. Let's see what Hipp wants to do on this turn. He's going to play a Watery Grave on tap. He's going to go down to 16. And this is Nefara, God of the Polis. So the new Blue-White God going to show up to the party. We've seen that a little bit today. You see a Grey Merchant to draw here for Koloff. We'll see what the follow-up's going to be. It looks like it might be Desecration Demon time as he does ask Hipp how many cards he does have in his hand. The answer is 4. And here is the 6/6 flyer. So Hipp will take a draw. There's a Detention Sphere. That's timely.
Although ideally, from this position, Ryan would like to curve out with a creature every turn.
Yeah. You see, he's going to ask how many cards are in hand. What you got working with over there, Mr. Koloff. Looks like he's got about 3 or 4 cards, does Daniel. Has not activated Underworld Connections just yet, but he's got a nice Devotion count here for future Grey Merchants. As you do see Hipp's hand, he can play a Leo's Sky Knight, and that's what he's going to do. So he's going to trigger Detain on the Desecration Demon. And then he's going to be able to get to draw a card with Afara, and we're also pretty close to Devotion for Afara, too.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty nice turn.
Really nice turn, and also got to get the Gilgate out of his hand.
So that die's going to be on there momentarily, just so that we know that that Koloff cannot attack with a Desecration Demon. The Temple of Deceit going to come into play here for Koloff. He's going to put the top card onto the bottom. And he does have 2 copies of Grey Merchant in his hand right now. And those Grey Merchants are going to be for 6. You can see the Underworld Connections along with the Desecration Demon in play, and so this is going to be a Nightveil Spectre. So now Grey Merchant's going to be for even more.
Yeah, since Ryan's going to be probably generating so much card advantage over the long term with his God, I think Daniel just wants to try to set up a burnout plan.
Yeah, I think that's completely reasonable in this situation. So you see Hipp, he has Detention Sphere, he's got Ultimate Price over there. He does still have that Blood Baron in his hand as well. He does have that card drawing engine with Afara. That's a really interesting card to me, Patrick, because I can certainly see that card really start to dominate some game states, especially in this kind of matchup.
We've seen a lot of it so far this weekend in a variety of different shells. So something of a coming out party for this card. I didn't get the vibe that it was a big part of the presence in the Nashville field. So
yeah, that's basically how I felt as well. Is now here's another Yev Sky Knight. So that's going to come in. You got to decide what you want to detain with that. This is always a card that I felt is really underpowered too. It's aggressively costed. Just does a lot of positive things. Detain is a really undervalued ability, as Hipp is going to play a dual land untapped. Now he's going to take care of that Nightveil Spectre. And now Afar actually gets to get into the red zone, and it's going to get to draw a card too. So this is a really impressive series of events by Hipp.
And cards like Yev Sky Knight and Afara are occasionally difficult to incorporate in decks, in part because you have to build a blue-white beatdown deck to maximize these cards. Not the easiest thing to do, but you give enough tools, and there can easily be a deck there.
connections activation, excuse me, on the end step there from Koloff. So he does get to draw one card on the end step, one card for his turn. Looks like he's going to try to find some action here. Desecration Demon. Yeah, its trigger can go on the stack, but it can't attack. And now Koloff is almost resigned to start casting Gray Merchants here, as he's going to activate connections one more time.
Yeah, I mean, he's facing down a lot of pressure.
Yeah. And that doesn't even account for the things that are going to be coming after it as well. You see the hand there for Koloff. Looks like he has 2 lands and 2 copies of Gray Merchant hiding out over there. May have a Hero's Downfall, actually. You see the Devotion count, 2, 4, 6, 8 for Hipp. So there is Gray Merchant. So the drain and gain is going to be for 6. So Koloff's going to go up to 14 and Hipp's going to go down to 8. So you can just flip those life totals that are on the screen. We'll take a draw.
And there's Obsidat.
That's a good Magic card. There are a lot of good Magic cards in this Esper mid-range deck. It's really interesting. Like, I feel like this deck is a deck that I don't think people know enough about, because there isn't really anyone endorsing it or really testing it and trying to figure out what slots are appropriate. Again, we saw it at the Japanese Grand Prix, and then we saw Mahara play it at the Sunday Super Series, but outside of that, you haven't seen anyone really write about it. Brad Nelson did an article about it, it feels like maybe 2 months ago, but outside of that, no one's been really saying, hey, this is where you need to be. This is the deck you need to be playing. It just hasn't happened.
Yeah, and Afara seems like a pretty ideal candidate to add to this deck. It's a little bit on the slower side. It plays a lot of creatures. There's a lot of synergies. Devotion is a reasonable thing to get to, so this might be another piece of the puzzle for Esper humans.
Bramaz is in Hipp's hand as well. I mean, the power level of the deck, the cards that it's individually casting are all quite good.
Yeah.
This is the deck that's just littered with extremely powerful cards and mythic rares. And, one of its weaker cards, uncommon, you have Sky Knight. That card's good, too.
Certainly once you're trying to fulfill a blue-white devotion count.
Yeah. Really, really interesting. All right, so here's an attack with all the creatures. That Afara's not messing around, too. That thing's a 6/5. That's a big, big creature.
You see a very quick no block here as Daniel's trying to keep his devotion count high, but
yeah, he has to.
Now this is going to be exact lethal, it appears.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 is exactly, so Obsidat's going to get the job done. And Ryan Hipp is going to win game number 1 here over Daniel Koloff. You've got Esper mid-range up a game over Mono Black Devotion in what was quite the lopsided affair, honestly.
And I'm curious if Ryan tanked on that attack for so long to try to induce Daniel to not block.
Yeah.
Because he was sitting there thinking about it, and, that's an indicator, if you're reading body language, Daniel might think, well, maybe he wants to leave this god back on defense and block my Gray Merchant because of life totals, and then Ryan was able to finish off the game with the Obsidat there. So possible that there was some little subtle bluffing and body language manipulation going on there.
Maybe a little bit of gamesmanship. As we'll take a look at Daniel Koloff's sideboard first. I have that in front of me, so I'm taking a look at 2 Dark Betrayals, 2 Devour Flesh, a Doom Blade, 2 Drown in Sorrow, 3 Duress, 2 Erebos, God of the Dead, and 3 Copy Lifebane Zombie. Boy, where to begin? That's the big question. Dark Betrayal is pretty good in this matchup because Obsidat's so good against Mono Black, but you don't have a lot of other things to kill with it.
Yeah, this is one of the nice things about an Esper Humans deck is, you see a lot of Doom Blades and Dark Betrayals in people's sideboards, and not all of those cards work. They all work against a percentage of the deck's threats, but you could definitely be caught with the wrong answer to the wrong threat.
You see Devour Flesh, which certainly has its purposes, but it can catch the wrong creature at the wrong time. A Singleton Doomblade will take care of some threats, but won't take care of others. Drown in Sorrow, I don't think is going to kill enough things because the top end is obviously it's way too good. It's not going to kill anything. Duress is okay, but the cards you care about might be creatures. Erebos is not for this matchup, and then I think the one card that could certainly come in is just Lifebane Zombie because it actually hits everything you're looking for.
Including the god, which is a big deal.
So that's a really big deal. I think Lifebane Zombie is the for sure card that's going to come in. The rest is all negotiable.
Yeah, and on the other side here, we have 2 Revoke Existence, 3 Doom Blades, a Supreme Buric, 2 Blood Barons, 4 Thoughtseizes, 2 Negates, 1 Sin Collector. I expect the Thoughtseizes, the Blood Barons, and the Sin Collector to come in. I don't know if he necessarily wants to negate, as most of the Mono Black Devotion top end is creatures and not spells, but certainly there are quite a few spells as well. I like Sin Collector because it's a little bit more proactive, but there's an argument for negate as well.
So we'll see how both players sideboard here. It looks like they are done doing that. At least for Daniel's side, he is, and you see Ryan's shuffling as well. So these players look like they are confident in their configurations, and we'll see them we'll see them go to battle here shortly. We'll also find out what's going on with Kent Ketter as well. Again, when we do have information about that, we'll certainly let you guys know. But it's fun. I think Esper mid-range is this deck that I think if someone actually kind of takes the time and really works on it, we could see another deck in this format.
Yeah, it's nice because a lot of attacking strategies, if they're really, really fast, you can try to overpower them or use sweepers. If they're really, really slow, you can try to go underneath them and be too fast. And the Esper deck occupies a nice middle ground, where if you're trying to outspeed them, they have removal cells and Precinct Captain. Brimaz, they can sideboard into additional copies of Supreme Verdict. And if you're trying to be too slow, then you can, use your Precinct Captains and Sky Knights to try to curve out on people. So very flexible, versatile deck, and it's not like they're making a lot of concessions in raw power to try to have this game plan. Every card in this deck is good. They're not playing any garbage to tie this all together.
Do have some tweets here as far as our arcade conversation is concerned. People saying that, obviously there's Evo. You can check out the footage for that on Twitch. The fighting game community is still strong, and I'm not surprised by that, obviously. When I'm not working, assuming that a weekend lines up appropriately, I have watched Evo coverage of Street Fighter 4 and archives on YouTube and stuff like that. But do people actually still just go to arcades, bring coins, or, at GameWorks, they have like a card that you put credit on, you swipe instead. Are people still doing that? Are there still lines at arcades? That's what I want to know. Because nowadays, everything is done online. So, there's the PlayStation Network and whatever the Xbox thing is that people play on. And you can just, sit in your house, buy an arcade stick, and just battle that way.
Nostalgia is a big part of our or I think all generations are like that, I mean, Pokemon's still a thing, in part because people around our age group care about things when they were kids. So
yeah, it is currently ruining Twitch right now, Pokemon. Yeah. There are some people out there who know what I'm talking about, where people are, it's like this group thing that people can do and tell you which way to go in Pokemon, and there's like 100,000 people watching it. It's insane.
Stoneblade Entertainment has lost a lot of hours of productivity because of this.
You know what it is.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's Ultimate Price. You gotta take care of Packrat, and now here's a Life Bane Zombie, so let's see what's in the grip. Oh, those are good cards.
A lot of good ones to choose from.
2 Blood Baron of Escopa and Brimaz. You see a Thoughtseize and a Spear, which is a little bit surprising to see, and then a Temple of Enlightenment.
Yeah, there's 2 Spear of Heliod's in Ryan's list here.
Yeah. A little surprised by that because it doesn't feel like the creatures need buffing, but that's a card that provides devotion for Afara, so I guess I get it.
Well, also what's really nice is that he has Brimaz and Blood Baron in the deck, which are 2 juicy Mizium Mortars targets.
That's true.
With a Spear, you get him out of range of that.
That's
too.
True.
So.
That's true. So Life Bane Zombie is going to take care of Brimaz. We're going to pass the turn back here. So Life Bane Zombie is going to start the racing. There's an Afara off the top there for Hipp. And he needs to start getting some things on the board, but he also needs to find some land. He's going to start with a Thoughtseize, however. So now here's a Bioblight, a Desecration Demon, another copy of Bioblight, and then an Underworld Connections. So it begs the question here as Hipp is going to decide on exactly what he wants to take. Should Hipp have played Temple of Enlightenment first and Scry?
It's interesting because do you want the Scry to inform your Thoughtseize, or do you want the Thoughtseize to inform your Scry?
Yeah.
It's close,
This current round, once again, players, side events will be closing for the
See
evening.
Hipp really trying to decide exactly what he wants to take here because he doesn't really care about the Bioblights. The question is, do I care about Connections or Desecration Demon? I think the one he cares about more is Desecration Demon because he doesn't want to be underneath the gun so fast.
Yeah, I like Ryan actually sequencing it this way because there's very little that the Scry will do to inform your Thoughtseize, but the Thoughtseize can really inform your Scry.
Yeah.
You need to know what reactive cards you're playing against and all that.
Looks like Hipp kept that card on top and is going to pass the turn back there with 2 Blood Barons and Afara and that Spear of Heliod. And there's a land off the top there for Koloff. That's a really important land, actually, because that's a Mutavault. Because Koloff only had 1 creature in play. Now he's got 2, and he's able to play Connections with the land up. So that's a huge draw. As Hipp does draw a Plains and see what he's going to deploy this go around. Could drop down the Spear.
Yeah, the problem is that he doesn't have, if he can't get to his 5th land for Blood Baron, the rest of his hand doesn't really enable very much.
And he's got to draw another land to really get back into this game. He's under some pressure, sitting at 13 when Koloff does have that Life Bane Zombie out there and a Mutavault threatening. I feel like you want to maximize your mana this turn and just cast the God.
I kind of like casting Spear here, actually, because if Ryan doesn't draw a land next turn, then he may be able to just leave Spear of Heliod up and prevent some attacks.
Okay.
Whereas the God does very little. The God only does something if you draw a 5th land next turn, potentially. And if Ryan's not worried about the scenario where he draws the 5th land. He's worried about the scenario where he doesn't.
Well, the draws here from Koloff off of the connections and his draw step were 2 copies of Grey Merchant. So that's scary.
Yeah.
And I think he may have drawn a 3rd copy of Grey Merchant, not positive, but he's going to send in for 5 either way. He's going to put Hipp down to 8. So if you're Ryan, you need to draw land right now, and Precinct Captain was the draw, so that's not what he was looking for.
And he knows about the Bioblights in Daniel's hand, so that's not even castable, really. He almost just has to say go with the Spear of Heliod up.
You see him kind of shrug a little bit here, saying, well, I know you have 2 removal spells in your hand, so this isn't at its best. And he does just pass the turn back, knowing that he needs to activate Spear to be able to get the job done. So, Koloff is going to draw a card here. And this is a Thoughtseize. Going to get some information. You do see those 2 Blood Barons from before, Afara and Precinct Captain, the new cards here for Koloff to see. You see Koloff's going to take a little bit of damage to do that, but he wants to make sure the coast is clear for his Mutavault and his Lifebane Zombie, and it is, outside of the Spear activation after damage. And we do just find out now that Keter is on to game 3 right now, so looks like he may have gotten a game loss for game 1 for a deck list error, and just moving forward as he does win game number 2. So if we're able to cut over to there, we will. So now we do see an activation of Mutavault. And now going to fire in, going to put Hipp down to 3, passing pretty confidently.
Yeah.
As Spear's ability that is not used very often. It's going to take care of that Lifebane Zombie. You see a Thoughtseize that can't really be cast right now. The only reason I can see Hipp casting Thoughtseize right now is he wants to get information for the next game. Because I don't think there's a way he can win this one, given that we know the context of each player's hand, and we know there's a Grey Merchant over there. So you just fire off a Thoughtseize, maybe get some info, and he's just going to pass the turn back. So Koloff's going to draw a card. There's a Swamp, and there's a Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and that is going to do it. So Daniel Koloff is going to tie this one up. Mono Black Devotion steals game number 2, and we'll be going to a 3rd one here between Hipp and Koloff momentarily.
Yeah, Ryan, you know, that's the downside of playing a deck like Esper midrange, is you get a lot of disconnected pieces. You know, creatures that weren't particularly synergistic with one another, rotting with a couple expensive spells in his hand. So when the deck draws very well, can curve out very smoothly. There's a lot of powerful synergies that can manifest, but that game kind of fumbled around and did very little.
Yeah.
The mono black deck is definitely a lot leaner, that's for sure.
Yeah,
everything's castable, everything just kind of works.
And, you know, also with Hipp's deck, he's playing so many Ravnica dual lands that he's taking a lot of incidental damage, which makes those Grey Merchants much better.
Yeah.
You know, it's more likely that you're going to get burnt out because of how much extra damage you're taking from your lands.
Yeah, Ryan was in a commanding position game 1 and nearly lost just to Grey Merchants.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
And that game certainly took a lot of damage as well.
So you see Hipp kind of going back to the drawing board here. Koloff looks like he's happy with his configuration. For Hipp, it's certainly important that he's going to be on the play against the old Mono Black Devotion deck, because he can kind of try to mimic what he did game number 1, which is just really just push him over with all these powerful cards.
Yeah, I think it's important for him to get off onto a good start and then eventually have Blood Baron to seal the game. I think is the best formula here.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't actually pressure, it's easy to say, you know, Ryan's got some powerful threats in his deck and he can kind of play a longer game. If he gives Daniel the opportunity to get his card advantages online, I think Ryan's in quite a bit of trouble.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. I think that both games that we just saw here, one from Hipp and the one from Daniel, each obviously winning each of those games, I think it's exactly how they want the games to go in this matchup. And Hipp's deck operated beautifully game number 1. Hipp, stumbled in game number 2, but I mean, Mono Black Devotion is a deck that's going to take advantage of you stumbling. That's part of the reason the deck is so good. You know, it gives you extra time to activate Underworld Connections, more cards that deck finds, more likely it's going to be able to find Pack Rat or the things that it's looking for to be able to kill you, and its cards are all so powerful that you can't afford to fumble around against them. So we're going to see what happens in game 3 here. Again, it's a big deal that Hipp is on the play because, you know, there are a lot of cards in this deck that are better on the play, Precinct Captain, for example, but I think Afara is a card that is so much better on the play than on the draw.
Yeah, of course. The Mono Black deck's not really going to put you under the gun, barring Pack Rat that early. So if you're able to get on a turn 4 Afara, you know, the Mono Black deck's not very likely to punish you tempo-wise that turn, and then you have a lot of flexibility for the way that you can play the game.
Because Afara is basically taking a turn off for an effect that's going to come down the road. Now, of course, the effect is powerful, as we saw in game number 1, but by tapping out to cast Afara on turn 4, you're basically taking a turn off.
Yeah. And, you know, Detention Sphere is such a great... It's a great card, of course. We see it all over the place. It's in decks with Afara, it's just such a natural synergy, you know? Just the ability to add to your devotion count incidentally like that, it's a big deal.
So you see both players going to make sure they have configuration correct. Daniel's going to go back to the drawing board really quick. Said, I thought of something. So let me get that back out there.
I think he might have been counting out his deck and it wasn't the right number of cards.
Yeah.
So he may have, in between games there, while he was messing around with the sideboard, gotten to either 59 or 61 cards or what have you. So just getting this all cleaned up.
Always make sure it is 60.
Yes.
Do not want to get an unnecessary game loss. There's a bad feeling, especially when you're 6-1 in an 11-round tournament.
Yeah.
Every match is super important right now, that's for sure. I'm interested in this deck on the left. I am. I kind of want to fire up Build Magic online, give it a shot. It just plays too many powerful cards for me for it not to be seeing more play or not having more results.
Yeah, I have a really difficult time playing decks where the mana is not ideal, where you lose games to not being able to cast cards. I understand that this is just a random hookup that I have, and it's not actual. Plenty of these decks could be good even if they're a little inconsistent. But I do like watching Esper Humans on camera, or Esper Midrange a lot on camera, in part because the deck does so many different things and has a lot of different angles of attack and a lot of weird small synergies. It's a fun deck to watch, that's for sure.
You see, Hipp looks a little agonized right now. Looks like, okay, so he's going to play a Water Grave tap and pass the turn back. This is a Temple of Deceit here from Koloff. He keeps the card on top and quickly passes his turn back. So on Hipp's second turn, let's see what he's going to do. He drew a Mutavault this turn. Now, you talk about a deck that already has some shaky mana.
There's one.
Yeah, okay, sure, there is one, that's it. But, you shaky mana, maybe. Can you really afford to play Mutavault? I know it's a great card.
Yeah.
It's a little bit risky, of course. He's just going to play that and pass the turn back. Opting to play Mutavault instead of maybe a land and to play tapped. There's an Nightveil Spectre. I think the reason for that is we're going to see it via way half of Far and Away, and that's exactly what we do see.
Mutavault in play, multiple double white cards in hand, although Hallowed Fountain the draw here, so... Oh, sorry. Temple of Enlightenment, rather.
Well, it's time to scry. Hey, you can't cast the Yev Sky Knight this turn, too, so...
These dual lands with similar looking arts are killing me here. I don't know who the art person is over at Wizard, but if we could have an art directive of make sure that dual lands of the same color combination, they're going to be appearing in the same standard format, don't have very similar art, it would make my job very easy, or much easier at least.
It just sounds like you're old to me. That's all.
Oh, it was definitely an issue with the original Ravnica lands and the bounce lands as well.
Yeah,
a lot of those art pieces are very similar.
See a Desecration Demon here from Koloff. Temple of Silence off the top here for Hipp. Does have access to double white mana right now. Does have Yev Sky Knight in his hand. Looks like a couple copies of Bramass as well. But that's 6/6 on an empty board. It'll change the way you play.
This is a way that Mono Black, in my mind, picks up a lot of wins, is just use a removal spell or the opponent stumbles out of the gate and there's an unchecked Desecration Demon and it's just too much damage.
Yeah. So, time to scry with Temple of Silence. We'll see what we find. That's going to go right to the bottom. And now there's a Bramass. So it looks like we are willing to take a hit for 6 here. It's always risky because you think, okay, I can take one hit, and then he starts chaining together Grey Merchants, and all of a sudden you couldn't afford to take any hits.
Yeah, Bramass has some pretty big upside to get on the table here, as if it's left unchecked, then the token generation can keep Desecration Demon in check.
Yeah. So let's see what Koloff wants to play this turn, because he's got some removal in his hand right now. He's also got another copy of Desecration Demon as well, so he could drop down another 6/6 flyer, or he could just go fire off removal spells. You see his hand, he's got 2 Devour Flesh, 2 Bile Blights, like he's got the world.
Yeah, it's his whole turn to cast one of his removal spells here, and you can tell he's
You're in the hall. Please come up to the stage.
and far and away the draw for Ryan here, which is an excellent answer to that demon.
It's a really good draw.
Ethan Dudley, please come up to the
This
stage.
is attack step. How about a Devour Flesh? Do you want to sacrifice your Mutavault? I don't know, do I? The answer looks to be yes.
Brandon Lee, please come up to the main stage. Brandon Lee.
It's risky. You have to imagine that you might be being trapped here. And he says, all right, activate Mutavault. All right, sacrifice this, get 2 life. All right, so Hipp's going to go up to 16. See another copy of Devour Flesh over there for Koloff, though. It's going to be a Desecration Demon, so now Hipp knows about that, assuming that he did see it. So now, the question is, do you want to cast Far and Away? Far, you can bounce his own guy, but you can't really love that play.
Yeah, and the sequence is a little risky from Daniel here, because if Ryan, before combat, just drops a second Mutavault into play, this whole thing gets blown up.
Yeah. But that Devour Flesh is going to take care of Bramaz, so it's going to go up to 19. And because his life total is so high again, I think Hipp can just afford to deploy another Bramaz.
Yeah.
And just move forward like it was just like last turn.
Exactly, especially with Far and Away in his hand, because if Daniel plays another creature next turn, that could be an enormous tempo swing.
Yeah. We'll see what line he's going to come up with here. But I don't think a ton has changed. You know, it's basically like Koloff just used 2 cards for myself back at 20. And so I can just go with what my game plan was previously.
I feel like you had to try to get this Bramaz going. Its value goes down so as the game progresses, and the upside is so huge. If he's able to get an opportunity to attack and connect with it, he gets a pretty substantial edge.
Yeah. So he's going to go with Yev Sky Knight. And that's going to detain the Desecration Demon for a little bit. Now there's a Swamp right off of the top there from Koloff. That feels a little bit scary here because he just took that and put it directly into play.
Part of me about this line from Ryan wonders if he's trying to induce Daniel a little bit. If Ryan plays Bramaz, it almost certainly forces a removal spell, whereas Yev Sky Knight makes it more attractive to play another creature, which really sets up the Far Away in Ryan's hand.
That's true.
That could be a factor as well.
See, Blood Baron with Scopa was the draw here for Hipp. So now he's got a lot of options. Got Blood Baron, got Far and Away that he can cast either half of or Fuse. He's got plenty of mana to do that, but he's going to go with the 4/4 Mythic. That is obviously fantastic in this matchup, especially when you know that your opponent does not have he has 2 less copies of Devour Flesh.
Yeah. And because of Bile Blight, a lot of these lists are kind of juggling around the different removal spells. It's possible there's no more copies in the deck. A lot of these decks have gone down to 2 or 3 copies.
You saw Hipp kind of pick up his Blood Baron, expecting it to die to Devour Flesh, but Koloff said, "I don't have an answer to that actually, so you're okay." And now the Far and Away looks, boy, does it look good.
This is going to be a really juicy Far Away.
So here's a Temple of Enlightenment. Time to scry here. So he's deciding what he wants to do, does Hipp. But yeah, this is going to be a really nice Far and Away turn if this is what he wants to do on this turn. Again, he does have access to Bramaz. He also has, I believe, a Spear of Heliod in his hand as well, does Hipp. You know, the troublesome thing here is imagine if he's looking at a Detention Sphere.
Oh, sure.
He would be compelled, obviously, to want to be able to do that, but he's going to attack with Blood Baron with Scopa. Going to put himself up to 18, going to put Koloff down to 14. Then let's see what the follow-up's going to be. Just going to be passing the turn back. Okay.
And this is another scenario where I think you just want to play it right away. If Daniel, again, before combat here, just puts Mutavault on the table, your Far and Away gets a lot worse.
5 mana, so now that is a Far and Away fused. So bye-bye Deso Demon. That one's going to go back to the grip. But as you mentioned, if the Mutavault had shown up, it gets really ugly there.
Yeah, a lot of players, they don't think about lands necessarily being things that can influence the way their spells resolve, because you can usually respond to everything your opponent does, but the lands can be tricky.
So now here's 3 mana. There's your Spear of Heliod, going to make that into a 5/5. Might change the math as far as damage is concerned now, how much life that he does gain. So Blood Baron's going to come in for 5. It's going to knock Koloff down to 9. It's going to knock Hipp up to 23.
And Blood Baron is, again, rearing its ugly head against Mono Black.
Now, I don't love the play of not playing the Bramaz there just because of Devour Flesh.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a little bit risky because he wants to leave up the activation for Spear, but his life total's so high that he doesn't really need to, in my opinion.
Right. I think the thinking is, you know, if he's confident that there's maybe 1 left in the deck, maybe 0, that this is a slightly better for managing the damage race. Although now Lifebane Zombie is a thing too, which...
Yeah. And that's always the fear about playing against a Mono Black is that, you know, if you sandbag a threat, as you see Spear take care of Desecration Demon after it gets across 6 points of damage, you can just lose it to discard.
Yeah, it's better to err on the side of just casting if you think it's close.
That's what it feels like now after playing this deck so much on Magic Online and seeing it on coverage, and which it just seems to happen a lot where the opponent's like, okay, I'll sandbag this threat, leave this up, and then, you know, unless he draws a discard spell, this works out perfectly, and they draw a discard spell because they have such a high density of that effect.
Yeah. For the record, I'm on your side, though, where I would have just cast the Bramaz instead of holding up Spear.
You know, I can certainly see, you know, merit to both sides of the argument.
Right.
And it ends up working out what feels like pretty well. It's just a Gray Merchant. It's going to drain and gain for 4. Because now Desecration Demon's off the table, and that's the card that, you know, Hipp presumably cared the most about.
Yeah, and Daniel has shown a willingness to be very aggressive in the face of the Spear of Heliod. Generally speaking, you want to wait until you can attack all at once, so you're your team isn't slowly being picked apart. That's doubly true when you're trying to build up a devotion count for things like Gray Merchant. So this setup would have gone a lot better had he waited last turn on his Desecration Demon attack.
Detention Sphere is the draw. In comes the Blood Baron yet again for 5. It's going to knock Koloff down to 3. It's going to bring Hipp up to 20. So I'm going to take one more attack from that 4/4 Vampire to get the job done. 5/5 Vampire, pardon me.
Blood Baron alongside the rarely paired Spear of Heliod.
Yeah. You see Hipp's got that Detention Sphere in his hand, deciding if I want to cast that to take care of your Gray Merchant. The decision is yes, I do. And the reason for that is because if another Gray Merchant shows up, it would be a gain of 7, so the game would continue for 2 more turns, as opposed to 1 right now. But it looks like Mr. Koloff just drew a Devour Flesh. He's going to pass the turn, and I hope for his sake that Hipp does not draw a Devour Flesh, and so here we go. All right, so now that's going to take care of that.
And based on the other cards in Daniel's hand, it looked like had he cast that Bramaz a couple of turns ago, it would have been in the clear.
Yeah. And now Hipp has 2 lands in his hand, so he's going to play Gullish Shrine and pass. And now Koloff is looking to turn this one around really fast. But, you know, I don't want to say we were mocking the Spear, but we were kind of questioning why the Spear is in the deck. It sure looks good now.
Oh, I like the Spear. I think that Daniel could have probably done a different job of trying to pace his attacks differently as you see Obsidian show up in such a way where he would have had a more commanding board in a position like this where he can start attacking.
Yeah. So Obsidian's going to come in. It's going to knock Koloff down to 1. Hipp's going to go to 27. And that is going to do it. So Ryan Hipp is going to win this match between Daniel Koloff. He's going to move on to 7-1. Esper Midrange, a deck that we haven't seen a ton of in Magic in general. Standard Grand Prix, any of that stuff, Open Series, Standard events. It's 7-1 right now. Now, 3 rounds is a lot. Yeah. But this deck, I feel like this deck can really do something in the metagame, but it's just, you know, people really haven't dedicated time to playing it. You see everyone playing Mono Black, Orzhov mid-range, the variants that go along with Desecration Demon Impact Rat. You see Mono Blue Devotion, Green Red Monsters is the new hotness right now, Revelation decks. No one really trying to make this work, so I really would like to see what happens if, you know, Hipp makes a deep run in this tournament.
Yeah, and Hipp's deck, you know, we're calling it Esper mid-range, so a lot of this is semantics. It's very similar to the Esper Humans list. He has Precinct Captain and Opposing Sovereign. The big thing that he's lacking is Athra Necromancer. To me, that's the defining card of the Esper Humans deck.
I would agree.
Which doesn't appear here. But